Thank you for watching Army Shakil 5858. I am Amir Budnam. I am thankful to all news resources and my team. Following news have been reported by American, European, Asian, African, Australian and Canadian news channels, and also by news agencies AFP, AP and Reuters. Now the headlines. Israel bombed Rafah yesterday despite United States resistance. In hush money case in New York, Stormy Daniels clashed with Trump lawyers. Aircraft powered by batteries. Western USA facing severe storms and tornadoes. Puerto Rico is facing heavy rain and flood. Ukraine facing defeat in eastern part of the country. Russia celebrated World War II victory. 25 attorney generals of US sued EPA over carbon emission. New US regulation for migrants. Student protests continue in US college campuses. Now the news in detail.
Tonight, breaking news, the deadly tornadoes touching down 140 miles per hour. The storm's now in the east, and yet another major system, the new threat right behind us. Also tonight, the passengers escaping a fiery jet crash, the flames all around them. And just in tonight, the search for the missing after an avalanche in Utah and the discovery. First tonight, these severe storms alerts this evening from Texas all the way east. A deadly EF3, winds 140 miles per hour, touching down. At least 17 reported tornadoes in just 24 hours. Ginger Z with the new system right behind us. Tonight, Donald Trump's defense attorney grilling Stormy Daniels. Daniels pushing back in that courtroom. The jurors studying this intently. And when Trump's team calls for a mistrial again, what the judge says. The horrific video tonight, authorities investigating the deadly police shooting of a U.S. airman in Florida.
Sheriff's office, open the door!
A deputy opening fire seconds after the airman opens the door of his home. How did this happen, and were authorities at the right home? Pierre Thomas on the many questions. Tonight, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu saying we will stand alone amid President Biden's threat to withhold U.S. weapons if there is a full-scale invasion of Rafah. A Boeing 737 crashing during takeoff, skidding off the runway. Passengers using emergency slides to escape amid the flames, some with critical injuries. In the U.S., the urgent search late today for skiers reported missing following an avalanche in Utah. What authorities tonight have just revealed. An American man falling into shark-infested waters in the Bahamas, attacked within seconds. How he survived this. Tonight, the NBA player suspended without pay for throwing the ball into the stands twice, hitting a fan in the face. What he's now saying tonight. Also tonight, how much of the U.S. could see the northern lights and the dog falling from a cliff, missing for days. And what's happened tonight.
From ABC News World Headquarters in New York, this is World News Tonight with David Muir.
Good evening, and reading it tonight here with the new tornado threat as we come on the air. The system moving into the east and another major system now right behind us, already on the move. Alerts right now for Dallas all the way east. At least 17 reported tornadoes in just the past 24 hours, and they have turned deadly. Down trees, live power lines, taking lives. This new system we're now watching moving across Texas and the Gulf and right into the east, and heavy rain for the northeast, Washington, D.C., Philadelphia, and New York. In Murray County, Tennessee, an EF3 tornado winds 140 miles per hour, threatening homes there. In Columbia, Tennessee, more than 100 homes damaged. One woman was killed there. Near Charlotte, North Carolina tonight, another person was killed. A second seriously hurt when a tree and live power lines fell on their SUV. Witnesses could hear them. Chief Meteorologist Ginger Z is standing by again tonight with the potential track of these new storms now moving in this evening. And Alex Perez leading us off here from the storm zone tonight.
Tonight, the death toll rising from violent storms that are now targeting the East Coast. 17 reported tornadoes in the last 24 hours. This EF3 twister in Middle Tennessee with winds of up to 140 miles per hour. Drone video revealing obliterated homes in Murray County, roofs sheared away, massive electrical transmission towers mangled and twisted along with power lines. Officials say at least one person was killed. Bobby Fine and his wife racing to their basement when the storm rolled in, emerging to find a scene of devastation.
We were probably halfway down the stairs before we started hearing the dog door downstairs just blow through with lots and lots of wind. So it came on really quick.
West of Charlotte, North Carolina, one person was killed and another hurt when a tree and live power lines fell on their SUV.
I heard somebody in there screaming. They was wanting help, and I just couldn't get over to them. I wanted to, but I just couldn't.
North of Atlanta, homes and businesses in Gilmer County torn apart by high winds this morning. This RV knocked sideways. Lee Brennan trying to salvage what she can from her waterlogged storage unit.
Right now, I'm okay. If you would have seen me about a half an hour ago, not so good.
And David, you can see the extent of the damage created by that EF3 twister. The roof of this home behind me here completely ripped to shreds by that storm. The National Weather Service says this tornado was half a mile wide. David?
Alex Perez reporting from Columbia, Tennessee. Alex, thank you. Let's get right to Chief Meteorologist Ginger Z tracking it all again tonight for us. Hi, Ginger.
Hi, David. It's hard to believe this is the fourth night in a row I've come to you saying we have tornado warnings active on the map, and we've had more than 55 reported tornadoes just this week. Looking at it there, that activity is in southeast Texas, just near Brady, but Waco is in it tonight, and a watch still exists for parts of South Georgia. But all the severe thunderstorm watches are for that action in Texas that's going to start blasting across the southeast tonight. A lot of this is going to happen after dark, so let's talk about the timing. Watch that massive red that's just south of Dallas there, starting now, and as it moves east, it's after about 8 or 9 p.m. that it slides over the state line into Louisiana, then Mississippi, eventually Alabama, and by 5 a.m., it's in the Florida Panhandle. Our friends in Destin, over to say Mexico Beach, and into Georgia again. Wake up, potentially with severe thunderstorm watches. Tomorrow, there'll be a little left in North Florida, South Georgia, but David, we finally get rid of it by the weekend.
All right, grateful for your help all week long. Ginger's E tonight. Ginger, thank you. Now to that dramatic scene in that New York City courtroom today, the criminal trial of Donald Trump. Stormy Daniels back on the stand. Trump's lawyer aggressively questioning Daniels. But in that courtroom with jurors watching intently, Stormy Daniels pushing back. Afterward, Daniels seen leaving the courthouse inside Trump's lawyers again, trying to call for a mistrial. Tonight here, what the judge said. Aaron Katursky at the courthouse.
Today in court, Donald Trump watched in rapt attention as his lawyer Susan Nicholas aggressively questioned Stormy Daniels. Daniels pushed right back. It came after Daniels testified in graphic detail about an alleged tryst with Trump in a Lake Tahoe hotel suite back in 2006, an encounter Trump denies. Today, his lawyer challenging the porn star, "You have a lot of experience of making phony stories about sex appear to be real." Daniels fired back. "The sex in the films is very real," she said, "just like what happened to me in that room." She added that if she were to fictionalize her encounter with Trump, I would have written it to be a lot better. Nicholas portraying Daniels as a scheming opportunist, insisting her story of her time with Trump generated a ton of publicity for you. "Lots of bad publicity," Daniels replied. Nicholas pressed on. "Now you had a whole new fan base and were able to sell yourself." "I just did the same job I always did," Daniels said. Trump's lawyer pointing out this candle Daniels sells online. Stormy, saint of indictments, asking her, "You're celebrating the indictment by selling things from your store, right?" "Not unlike Mr. Trump," Daniels replied. "Former president has turned every twist and turn of his trials into a fundraising opportunity." Daniels made it clear she is more than happy to see Trump on the ropes. His lawyer showing her this old tweet. "You're drinking champagne because you're celebrating that Trump was indicted?" "Yes," she replied, as Trump shook his head. But on redirect, prosecutors asked Daniels, "Have you been telling lies about Mr. Trump or the truth about Mr. Trump?" "The truth," she said. After 7 hours on the witness stand, Stormy Daniels left the building. Trump's lawyers once again asked for a mistrial, calling the porn star's testimony extremely prejudicial, but Judge Juan Merchan rejected the request. "This is not a case about sex," argued defense attorney Todd Blanche. "The NDA was entered. Whether it happened or not has nothing to do with the charges in this case." Trump's lawyer objected to Daniels' detailed description of her alleged fling with Trump. But prosecutor Joshua Steinglass insisted the details corroborate that the sex happened. "You know who knew what happened in that room? Mr. Trump knew," Steinglass said. "That was Mr. Trump's motive, to silence this woman in 2016. Judge Merchan telling Trump's lawyers, bottom line, "You deny that there was ever a sexual encounter between Stormy Daniels and the defendant. Your denial puts the jury in a position to decide who they believe."
So let's bring back in Aaron Katursky at the courthouse again tonight. So Aaron, Stormy Daniels on the stand for 7 hours over 2 days. You were there in the courtroom. I'm curious tonight. You were studying those jurors. How did they react? Did they react at all?
The jury was captivated, David. As Stormy Daniels sparred with defense attorney Susan Nicholas, the jury box became a tennis stadium. The jurors going back and forth between the attorney and the witness. There's no way to know how the jurors took in the more explicit details, and the defense said they were so prejudicial it warranted a mistrial, but the judge said absolutely not. Because Donald Trump denies having sex with Stormy Daniels, the judge said the jury is left to decide who to believe. David?
Aaron Katursky again tonight. Thanks, Aaron. We turn now to a horrific case in Florida. The very disturbing police body camera video tonight. A deputy opening fire seconds after a U.S. airman opens the door of his own home. How did this happen? And were authorities at the right home? There are so many questions. Here's our Chief Justice correspondent, Pierre Thomas.
Tonight, a new criminal investigation into whether a Florida deputy was justified in fatally shooting 23-year-old U.S. Airman Roger Fortson in his own home. You see the tragic moment unfold in this body camera footage. The officer announces his presence at Fortson's apartment after receiving a report of a disturbance.
Sheriff's office, open the door!
Fortson appears and is shot almost instantaneously. Look closely. You see the door open, and there appears to be a gun in Fortson's right hand, but it's pointing downward, never aimed at the officer, who immediately fires off 6 rounds, striking Fortson in the chest and the arm. Fortson later died at the hospital.
He shot up. My baby was shot up.
His family claiming authorities had the wrong apartment.
We know there were no disturbances. He was on the phone with his girlfriend.
Tonight, Fortson's girlfriend releasing video recorded from their FaceTime, of what she says are his final moments.
Do not move, stop moving.
But authorities claim the officer was at the right apartment.
I want to assure you that we are not hiding, covering up, or taking action that would result in a rush to judgment of Mr. Fortson or our deputy.
This one is someone like you're getting out camp.
The body camera video does show the deputy being directed to Fortson's apartment by a woman at the complex.
Which room is it?
But tonight it's unclear whether Fortson did something that led to the report of a disturbance. His family says no one else was in the apartment.
Tell the truth about my son. I know my son did not do anything to you guys.
They say Fortson was a decorated patriot who loved his country, buying his 10-year-old sister an Air Force uniform so they could take this picture together. Fortson's family says his gun was legally owned and that he had a right to defend himself. David, the officer has been placed on administrative leave while state law enforcement officials investigate this tragic case.
So many questions. Pierre Thomas with us here tonight. Thanks, Pierre. Tonight, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu defiant, saying we will stand alone after President Biden's threat to withhold U.S. weapons if there's a full-scale invasion of Rafah. And these tense talks over a ceasefire halted amid fury over Rafah, with so many hostages still being held by Hamas. Barry Bruce at the White House tonight.
Tonight, as President Biden threatens to further withhold U.S. weapons from Israel, Prime Minister Netanyahu defiant. If we have to stand alone, we will stand alone, he said today, firing back after Biden, in his most direct warning yet, said the U.S. would not provide Israel with weapons to attack Rafah.
I've made it clear to Bibi and the War Cabinet, they're not going to get our support if, in fact, they're going to these population centers.
It comes after the president has warned Netanyahu for weeks not to invade Rafah, where more than 1 million civilians are seeking refuge. But those warnings have been ignored. Netanyahu already launching what he says are limited operations inside Rafah, choking critical humanitarian aid. Biden already halting the shipment of 3,500 U.S. bombs, fearing American weapons could be used to kill more innocent Palestinians. Tonight, many Republicans now accusing Biden of abandoning a critical ally, including Donald Trump, who today repeated an anti-Semitic trope questioning Jewish voters who stand by the president.
If any Jewish person voted for Joe Biden, they should be ashamed of themselves. He's totally abandoned Israel.
The Biden campaign quick to condemn those comments as the president insists U.S. support for Israel's defense remains ironclad. Now, the president says the U.S. will continue to provide for Israel's defense, even as he threatens to halt sending offensive weapons to them. And tonight, those ceasefire talks are now stalled. The sticking point, we're told, is Rafah. Israel insisting that any temporary ceasefire deal exclude their operations in what they say is a Hamas stronghold. David.
All right, Mary Bruce at the White House tonight. Mary, thank you. Overseas tonight into a terrifying scene in Senegal. A Boeing 737 crashing during takeoff, skidding off the runway. Passengers using emergency slides to escape amid the flames, some with critical injuries. Here's our foreign correspondent, James Longman.
Tonight, terrifying images of passengers fleeing a burning plane that crashed during its takeoff run in Dakar, Senegal. The Boeing 737 Air Senegal charter hurtling down the runway but skidding onto the grass before it could lift off. Frightened passengers then jumping down emergency slides as the fire burned. Of the 85 people on board, 10 were hurt, with 4 suffering life-threatening injuries. The plane's wing and engine badly damaged. It's not clear yet what may have triggered the accident. It comes a day after this FedEx cargo plane landed without its nose gear on a flight from Paris to Istanbul. The crew telling the tower the gear would not deploy, the plane kicking up sparks as it slid along the runway. The 2 pilots on board the Boeing 767 were not injured in that landing.
And no clues yet as to what caused either of these terrifying incidents, David, but aviation authorities are investigating.
James Longman reporting from London. Thank you, James. Meantime, back here in the U.S. tonight, there is late word coming in from Utah after an urgent search late today for skiers reported missing following an avalanche. They have just revealed that 2 skiers in this did not survive. And here's Mola Lengi.
Tonight, authorities say 2 skiers are now dead after becoming trapped in an avalanche in the steep terrain of Utah's remote backcountry. A 3rd skier able to escape.
Notify search and rescue as well as DPS to see if they have a airship available.
Multiple departments responding around 10 a.m. today after getting calls about 3 friends trapped in an avalanche near the popular Lone Peak Summit, just outside of Salt Lake City.
We have not gone up yet because it's unsafe for our folks to go up there, so they're going to be doing some mitigation to make it safe for our folks to go up.
All 3 skiers equipped with avalanche gear. Authorities say one of them was able to dig himself out and call for help. First responders seen transporting him from a helicopter to an ambulance.
He was in pretty fair condition, other than mentally, going through something like this is extremely scary.
Authorities say that 3rd skier was able to reach his friends, but they were dead. Tonight, their bodies remain on the mountain because of treacherous weather conditions.
Well, David, experts say avalanches this late in the ski season are incredibly rare, but a recent storm that dropped about 2 feet of snow in the area, really increasing the dangers in the backcountry there. David?
Mola Lengi reporting in for us tonight. Thank you, Mola. When we come back here, an American man falling into shark-infested waters, attacked within seconds. How he survived this. Also, the NBA player suspended for throwing the ball into the stands twice, hitting a fan in the face, and what he's now saying tonight. And get ready, because how much of the U.S. could soon see the Northern Lights?
Yang, though. Different.
Much of the U.S. could soon see the Northern Lights. Tonight, an American man surviving a harrowing shark attack in the Bahamas. Mark Wakeman was working on a boat docked at a marina. He slipped and fell into shark-infested waters, a 7-foot reef shark, biting him on the leg within seconds. He pulled himself out of the water, the captain tying a tourniquet around his leg, saving it. He is now recovering. He says they see sharks in those waters. Look at that, every day. When we come back here tonight, the NBA player suspended what he did to a fan, and how much of the country is about to see the Northern Lights. To the index, the Milwaukee Bucks' Patrick Beverley is now a free agent. He's now been suspended 4 games without pay for throwing a basketball at fans in the stands twice and hit a fan in the face during last week's playoff loss to Indiana. Tonight he says, quote, "What I did was bad, and that should have never happened." Millions of Americans could be in store for a rare look at the Northern Lights this weekend. In fact, expected to be visible over much of the country beginning tomorrow night. Northern California across to Michigan to Massachusetts, possibly as far south as Alabama, of course, weather permitting. When we come back here tonight, the dog falling from a cliff. They could hear him but not see him for days. What's happened tonight?
ABC World News Tonight with David Muir, sponsored by Vivgard and Vivgard Hydrulo.
Finally tonight here, the quarry workers, the firefighters, the rescuers, it took them all to find the dog. Tonight in North Canaan, Connecticut, Rippy, a 30-pound terrier mix, and one terrifying fall. Rippy and his owner were walking along a quarry when suddenly Rippy disappeared. They looked everywhere for hours and nothing. Days later, the North Canaan Animal Shelter got a call about a dog barking near that quarry. They went to investigate, but they could not find a dog. Day 3, men working in the quarry hearing the dog barking too. Word spread, the town, volunteers all began jumping in to help. Quarry workers, firefighters, the Northwest Regional Rope Rescue teams carefully rappelling down the 50-foot cliff. At the very bottom, they see him. Rippy right there. They safely bring him back up the cliff. And right here tonight, the rescue team.
Good evening, David.
Aaron Howard from Amenia Fire Company.
It's a great feeling to contribute to such a coordinated operation. Volunteers stand ready to assist when people in situations are at their most challenging.
Joining us too.
Hi, David.
Lindsay Burr from North Canaan Animal Control.
The rescue of Rippy could not have happened without all the volunteers that came out to help.
Tonight, they tell us Rippy is now home from the vet and on the mend.
He is doing okay, and his mom said he's very happy to be home.
Tonight, one incredible rescue, thanks to the quarry workers, the firefighters, the rescue teams, who all work together to find Rippy. We're so glad Rippy is home and grateful to that entire community. I'm David Muir. We'll see you right back here tomorrow night. Good night.
Thank you for making World News Tonight with David Muir, America's most watched newscast.
Tonight, the tense cross-examination. Stormy Daniels clashing with Donald Trump's attorney at his hush money trial. The adult film actress sparring with the former president's defense team as they accused her of making up a sexual encounter with Mr. Trump and profiting off it. Daniels denying those claims, the defense asking for a mistrial but rejected again. And a star witness no longer expected to testify. Also tonight, new reports of tornadoes today in the southeast after severe storms left a deadly trail. We're tracking it. The growing fallout from President Biden's threat to cut off weapons to Israel if it invades Rafah. The defiant response from Prime Minister Netanyahu. The U.S. airman fatally shot at his Florida apartment after his family says a deputy went to the wrong home. The body cam showing the deputy knocking and announcing himself. The airman answering with a gun by his side. Then the deputy firing multiple shots. The airman's family speaking out to us tonight. The jetliner skidding off the runway in Senegal. The plane on fire as people jump down the emergency slide. Our NBC News report the women suing over chemicals in hair products they say gave them cancer. And the idea taking root across the world. A little pocket of nature coming to the big city.
This is NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt.
Good evening and welcome.
An ultimatum to Israel this Thursday night. The action the U.S. could take if the IDF invades Rafah.
A major military operation in Rafah would further weaken Israel's standing in the world.
And where ceasefire talks stand now. Another scare on a Boeing plane. As the company is hit with new allegations. A prescription for plastic medical waste. How some Canadian hospitals and suppliers are reducing their carbon footprint. Plus, refusing to stand idly by and risking her life.
There's such a huge responsibility to stay here with these people.
A BC woman on the front lines to help residents of war-torn Ukraine.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Mara Nasser.
Good evening to you. Thanks for joining us. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu defiant tonight in his response to U.S. President Joe Biden. If we stand alone, we will stand alone, says Netanyahu in a video message. He addressed Biden's decision to halt some shipments of American weapons to Israel over fears of a full-scale ground invasion in Rafah. Withholding some military aid is the White House's strongest warning to Israel since October 7th. But what that move would accomplish isn't exactly clear. Israeli defense forces are already in Rafah, which has been subject to a sustained bombing campaign for weeks. And according to the White House, weapons shipments are still going into Israel. What isn't getting there is enough humanitarian aid. Demonstrators in Israel staged a sit-in blocking aid trucks from entering the Gaza Strip. According to the World Food Program, there is only 3 days' worth of food and fuel left in southern Gaza. Fleeting hopes of a ceasefire are all but gone after negotiations broke down in Cairo today as the world waits for a pending ground invasion in Rafah. Jackson Prosco has our top story tonight.
This is the aftermath of an Israeli airstrike in Rafah, a grim preview of what the U.S. fears a full Israeli ground invasion would look like. My friend died. They picked him up in pieces. Everything is in pieces, says the survivor. And so, as Israeli tanks mass near the border with southern Gaza, the U.S. has drawn an unusually sharp line in the sand, a clear rebuke of its close ally.
They're going to Rafah. I'm not supplying the weapons that have been used historically to deal with Rafah.
The Israeli government remains undeterred and says it has all the weapons it needs to proceed with the missions it has planned. We will do whatever is necessary to defend the citizens of Israel, said the defense minister. Despite withholding thousands of bombs, the White House acknowledges the vast majority of military aid to Israel is still being shipped.
It may be part of a sort of an escalating campaign to change Israel's mind. If it's seen that this is, the next step, and there will be other steps, if Israel doesn't come back to the ceasefire table and accept a compromise.
In the face of conflict, the U.S. is also trying to exert soft power, proposing alternative methods for defeating Hamas that don't involve a ground invasion.
A major military operation in Rafah would further weaken Israel's standing in the world, would further create distance from its partners in the region, who actually share Israel's goal of seeing Hamas defeated.
Yet ceasefire talks are effectively paused for now, as Israel steps up preparations for an operation in Rafah. All while the humanitarian crisis for more than 1 million displaced Palestinians grows deeper by the day. Jackson Prosco, Global News, Washington.
Ukraine launched an air attack on Russia today, injuring at least 8 people. Dozens of residential buildings and cars were severely damaged in Belgorod along the border with Ukraine. Among the injured, an 11-year-old girl who was taken to hospital. And a Ukrainian drone has struck a major oil processing plant in Russia. It's about 1,500 kilometers away. And Ukraine claims it's the longest range attack of its kind since the start of the full-scale invasion. A Ukrainian drone also sparked a huge fire at another oil refinery in Russia. Several storage tanks were damaged. Troops have been stepping up strikes on energy infrastructure key to funding the Russian economy and the war on Ukraine. Airplane manufacturer Boeing is facing more trouble today after its passenger planes were at the center of 2 dangerous incidents in 2 different countries, both happening within hours. And it's the latest on what's already a long and troubling trend of similar events involving Boeing's aircraft. As Neith Garcha reports, that's on top of more whistleblowers accusing the company of turning a blind eye on safety.
From a frantic evacuation after an aircraft skid off the runway during takeoff in Senegal, to a front tire bursting upon touchdown in Turkey with nearly 200 people safely evacuated without injury. 2 separate incidents within hours of each other on Thursday involving Boeing 737s have left passengers shaken. Officials in Senegal commend the pilot's handling of the situation. They say 10 of the nearly 79 people on board were hurt, 4 of them with serious injuries. An investigation is underway into the cause of the incident, which temporarily shut down the airport. It's the third incident involving a Boeing plane to make headlines this week at a time when the company is facing intense scrutiny.
This is a recipe for disaster, really.
Now a whistleblower from Spirit Aerosystems, a key Boeing supplier, has come forward with alarming allegations. The former quality manager claims there was a culture of negligence where defects in Boeing 737 fuselages were allegedly overlooked, compromising safety standards and risking passenger lives.
If quality matter, I will still be a Spirit.
In February of 2022, Santiago Paredes says he was asked to speed up inspections by being less specific about where he was finding issues, saying he emailed managers to state it was unethical and put him in a very uncomfortable situation. He eventually resigned.
It takes a toll on you, and I was tired of fighting.
The Air Force veteran who worked 12 years at Spirit was known as Employee 1 in a lawsuit filed by Spirit shareholders in December for widespread quality failures.
For many years, they knew they were getting defective fuselages.
Boeing said it's taken significant action to improve the quality of Spirit Aerosystems fuselages and maintains the 737 is a safe airplane. As for Thursday's incidents in Turkey and Senegal, Boeing said the planes were delivered 16 and 30 years ago, respectively, referring further comment to the airlines. Neetu Garcha, Global News, Vancouver.
Police have tracked down another suspect in last year's heist of cold bars from Toronto's Pearson Airport. Archie Grover was arrested on Monday after he returned to Canada on a flight from India. He and 8 other suspects are accused of stealing a cargo shipment containing nearly $24 million worth of gold bars and foreign currency. 2 of the suspects remain wanted on Canada-wide warrants. Parks Canada is closing Clear Lake in Manitoba's Riding Mountain National Park to all personal watercraft to quash the spread of zebra mussels, an invasive species. There are exemptions, including a commercial tour boat and a First Nation vessel that will be allowed for cultural use. Zebra mussels were detected in Clear Lake late last year. It's the farthest west that they've spread. The federal government says there are nearly 90 active wildfires already burning across Canada today. Although only 6 are said to be out of control, the majority are burning in remote northern parts of BC and Alberta, regions that were devastated during last year's record-breaking season. David Aiken reports on how both federal and provincial officials are using lessons from last year to be better prepared for what's to come.
The 2023 wildfire season was one for the ages, a record-setting number of fires, many of never-before-seen size and intensity. And with hot, dry conditions this spring, especially in much of Western Canada, the 2024 wildfire season is setting up to be a repeat.
It's likely to be another challenging wildfire season.
But federal and provincial governments are applying some lessons learned from 2023.
Learning from one another is probably one of the best things that we've done last year, and putting that information to use.
First, find more people to fight the fires and to deal with emergencies. Governments are on track to have an additional 1,000 wildland firefighters in place this year. On top of that, many municipal firefighters are getting training specifically to fight wildfires. And Ottawa has updated agreements with international partners to get firefighters from other countries into action in Canada more quickly.
So our coordination is much better.
In recognition that evacuations will inevitably be required, federal and provincial agencies are teaming up with the likes of the Salvation Army to pre-position supplies for evacuees in regions most likely to be impacted by fires. And St. John Ambulance has 10,000 volunteers trained up and ready to help. Governments are also tapping high-tech resources. The feds have bought 34 new high-performance radars to gather more accurate data. And Ottawa is spending hundreds of millions of dollars on high-performance computing capacity so that Environment Canada can produce more precise forecasts. And both Canada and the U.S. are sharing the latest in satellite technology.
Better detection, better data gathering on the one hand, and better capacity to analyze that data and provide real-time information.
Even these early season media briefings are new innovations for 2024.
Starting today, people can use the new Emergency Ready Planner
to help Canadians prevent fires and prepare for any disasters ahead. David Aiken, Global News, Ottawa.
Severe weather in the U.S. is being blamed for at least 3 deaths overnight. Incredible drone video shows the power of a storm in Tennessee. Homes ripped to their foundations after a suspected tornado touched down just south of Nashville. At least 13 tornadoes were reported across 6 southern states. Severe weather is forecast into tonight from Texas to the Carolinas. In New York, Stormy Daniels returned to the stand in the hush money trial against Donald Trump. The former adult film star sparred with the defense over details of her alleged sexual encounter with the former president. During cross-examination, Trump's lawyer accused Daniels of changing her story in books and interviews over the years and seeking to profit off it through merchandise. They also targeted Daniels' adult film career, arguing she has experience making phony stories about sex. Daniels fired back, insisting her account has never changed. She also said if her story was untrue, she would have written it to be a lot better. Trump faces 34 counts of falsifying business records to allegedly hide the repayment to his former lawyer, Michael Cohen, for the $130,000 payment made to Daniels. Trump denies the charges and the alleged affair. Canada's largest national cancer charity is revising its guidance, urging women to start getting regular mammograms at the age of 40. The original recommendation in Canada was for most women to wait until the age of 50. The Canadian Cancer Society says it's changing its position to reflect evolving evidence and calls for action from patients who are frustrated that many women aged 40 to 49 are being excluded from breast screening. It also cites an Ipsos poll from February saying 90% of Canadians support that expansion of cancer screening access. A major U.S. health task force made the same recommendation in April. Rising tension in northern Alberta. Coming up, the feud between a First Nation and an energy company. RCMP say they are hopeful a First Nations blockade in northern Alberta will come to a peaceful resolution after demonstrators ignored a court injunction to clear the area. The camp was established on Sunday, northwest of Edmonton, near the town of Peace River. Members of the nearby Woodland Cree First Nation have been stopping crews from Calgary-based Obsidian Energy from accessing one of its pipeline sites. As Heather Yorks West explains, the camp is the latest development in the tense conflict.
It was a clear statement of defiance by Alberta's Woodland Cree First Nation Monday.
I'm going to file this with the Great Spirit right now.
After being served with a court order to end its blockade of an oil lease road, the chief throws the documents in the fire.
Hey.
It's the latest chapter of a long simmering dispute between the Northern Alberta community and Obsidian Energy. RCMP say they won't be enforcing the court order for now.
We're in a phase where we're hoping to come to a peaceful agreement between the two parties.
The First Nation says its relationship with Obsidian broke down after the company announced plans to drill 200 new wells without any consultation. A blockade was first set up back in February, but the First Nation took it down when the company agreed to talk. Months later, the chief says nothing has been resolved.
They're looking to exploit our land. They basically take the resources and not have anybody benefit or share in the prosperity of that development.
Calgary-based Obsidian Energy declined a request for an interview, pointing Global News to a statement made earlier this year by the company's CEO. We cannot accept their unrealistic terms that amount to a monopolistic relationship as our sole provider of certain services, Stephen Lucas said. Last year, the Alberta Energy Regulator issued an environmental protection order against Obsidian for causing a series of earthquakes, including the largest ever recorded in the province's history.
We just want to say, hey, we're here, right? Work with us, listen to us. Don't just keep trying to attack us and manipulate us.
RCMP say so far the blockade, which is on traditional Woodland Cree territory but not reserve land, has been peaceful. But the First Nation says it has no plans to back down. Heather Yerkes West, Global News, Calgary.
Medical waste management ahead how some hospitals are trying to reduce their environmental impact. In the world of healthcare, a lot of resources go into medical procedures to improve or save lives. But those efforts also produce a lot of waste. Eric Sorensen looks at how some facilities in Ontario are taking steps to cure long-standing issues in sustainability.
In an emergency, hospitals save lives. But there's a public health emergency where hospitals fall short. The environmental waste they generate. Plastics, single-use implements, gloves, masks, even gowns that all too often end up in landfills.
Healthcare actually represents 5% of the national carbon footprint.
McMaster Children's Hospital produces 3 tons of waste every day, but it's becoming an environmental leader and leaning on its suppliers to follow suit.
So this is an instrument called a ligature.
What sets this gynecologic device apart is it's recyclable. After they're used, Stryker, the manufacturer, takes them back, sterilizes the pieces, and rebuilds them to be used again.
It's an improved ability for us to have sustainable accountability for what waste we're creating in the operating room as well as medical waste.
Some used surgical equipment now gets dropped in this green bin, a yellow bin for sharp needles and such, and a hamper for one of the most environmentally damaging plastics, PVCs.
They put IV bags, nasal cannulas, oxygen masks inside of that.
When thrown out, medical tubing and IV bags release toxic microplastics into the environment, but Hamilton Health Sciences hospitals are recycling them to be transformed into flooring or other products.
The PVC program has diverted 4 tons of waste from the landfill, which is about the equivalent of an elephant by weight.
One of the biggest sources of medical waste, especially during the pandemic, was hospital gowns, often discarded after one use. Ecotex takes in tons of used gowns and linens and is partnering with hospitals not just to clean them, but to get 75 or more uses out of each one.
So we focused a lot on innovating with our suppliers and finding ways that we can have longer lasting and more functional textiles.
The key to all of it is hospital systems leveraging their enormous public dollars to require private companies to be more sustainable.
Say, hey, tell us what you're doing regarding your environmental performance because we're going to begin scoring you on those things, and we're developing that criteria right now.
It drives decision making for companies like ourselves to step up and be part of the solution and help make healthcare more sustainable in the future.
Waste can be cut throughout the supply chain, says Miles Sargent.
And I tell the hospitals that are doing this to talk about it, brag about it, let the community know how important this is.
He says all industries can be more sustainable, and healthcare should lead the way. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Hamilton, Ontario.
We are loaded up with 4,500 liters of... Standing her ground next, what inspired a BC woman to help on the front lines in Ukraine? We all know what it's like to make sacrifices, but there's one woman in BC who has been crisscrossing a country at war, helping civilians and soldiers. April Huggett's trip to Ukraine was supposed to last 20 days. It's stretched into 17 months. Mike Armstrong spoke to her today at her home, not far from the front lines. We are loaded up with 4,500 liters of water today.
It's not the sort of delivery she ever thought she'd make. April Huggett drove Wednesday to a town barely 10 kilometers from the front line.
Just over the hill there. I was fully Russian-occupied territory.
The mission on this day was to deliver drinking water to civilians, people who live with the fighting every day. The trick, Huggett says, is ignoring the fear and concentrating on the work.
Eventually, you just realize that if the rocket is made for you, it will find you.
Good morning, Night Review. I'm with the 9th 3rd Brigade.
This is the sort of thing Huggett has been doing in Ukraine since arriving in December of 2022. She makes videos explaining exactly what people need, and with the donations, buys them.
All this stuff is incredible. Thank you so much for doing this.
Now, the delivery is the dangerous part, but it's the fundraising that's the bigger challenge. She's only been home for 20 days in the last 17 months, and it's been hard convincing Canadians she's doing what she says she's doing.
The problem is I'm here. So it's really hard. I tried to get on the phone and call Canadian churches and call people back home and say, even the Legion, hey, I'm out here, I'm Canadian. And they're like, who's this lady on the phone? And they don't know if it's a scam or not.
In the early days after the Russian invasion, Huggett says she was deeply affected watching what was happening. But it was after the attack on the city of Bucha in March of 2022 that pushed her to act.
How can we let this happen? We, especially in Canada, we always say, lest we forget. I felt like we were forgetting.
Huggett started in Canada with fundraisers and collections, but decided she should be on the ground to help. Her family fought it. It meant leaving her son and 2 daughters at home.
They're amazing. I hope that they're proud of me one day. They say that they are, but I hope that when they're older, they truly understand what we did here.
Huggett hoped to be home in Canada later this month. The problem is war, and helping the people in it keeps getting in the way. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Montreal.
And that's Global National for this Thursday night. I'm Farah Nasser. On behalf of our whole crew here, I want to thank you so much for spending part of your evening with us. Tonight's Your Canada is beautiful Jasper National Park in Alberta. We love seeing your Canada, so please keep emailing us your photos at viewers@globalnational.com. Until tomorrow, take care of yourselves and take care of each other. Good night.
Good evening, I'm Amna Nawaz. Jeff Bennett is on assignment. On the NewsHour tonight, Israel bombards Rafah as its leaders respond with defiance to President Biden freezing some weapons deliveries. Stormy Daniels clashes with Donald Trump's legal team as she takes the stand for a second day in the former president's hush money trial. And a look at a battery-powered aircraft that could lead the transition away from fossil-fuel flight.
You can get in it, you can fly in it, you can carry cargo in it. This aircraft isn't a gimmick, it is a real-world aircraft. It is reliable.
Welcome to the NewsHour. Today, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said his country would, quote, stand alone if necessary, a response to President Biden's recent move to pause deliveries of some bombs to Israel. That decision has created a possible turning point in the U.S.-Israel relationship and the war in Gaza, with the fate of hostage negotiations in the balance. Israel is now poised to expand its operation in Rafah, a step the U.S. is warning Netanyahu not to take. Nick Schifrin begins our coverage.
In southern Israel, tanks are massed and nearly ready for an assault. They fire at Rafah, where ongoing airstrikes rip the roofs off homes, toppled minarets, and killed victims who are so easy to carry, the burden becomes all the heavier. And President Biden is concerned an expanded military operation would kill more Gazans like Yazan Hassan Khan.
They will launch that major operation in Rafah if there is not a hostage deal.
Nick Schifrin beginning our coverage tonight. Nick, thank you.
Thank you.
In the day's other headlines, large stretches of the Deep South face a new wave of severe storms, including possible tornadoes. Dangerous conditions delayed flights in Atlanta and Charlotte and closed schools in some places. A day earlier, Tennessee reported multiple tornadoes and saw barrages of massive hail. The storms also left widespread destruction and hundreds of thousands of people without power. In all, 4 people have died this week from the extreme weather. Puerto Rico has declared a state of emergency and activated the National Guard amid unrelenting rain and flooding. The U.S. territory has had more than 10 inches of rain in just 2 days, turning streets into rivers and triggering landslides. Officials say 1 person is missing, several people have been rescued from rooftops, and crops have been badly damaged. In Ukraine, President Volodymyr Zelensky warned today his country faces a, quote, really difficult situation in the east as Russian forces gain ground. Zelensky spoke in Kyiv with the president of the European Parliament. He said new military aid from the United States needs to arrive soon.
With an increase in the supply of weapons, we will be able to stop them in the east. As of now, they seized the initiative there. This is no secret. We need to stop them, take the initiative into our own hands. This is possible only when you have something strong in your hands.
Zelensky's comments followed a week of heavy Russian bombardments. Today, officials confirmed that 2 hydropower plants were knocked out in the assaults. In the meantime, a Ukrainian drone attack today damaged an energy plant more than 900 miles inside Russian territory. That is the deepest strike yet by Kyiv's forces. Russia focused on a different conflict today, its defeat of Nazi Germany in World War II. Victory Day brought parades and pageantry orchestrated by President Vladimir Putin. On a cold, snowy day in Moscow, military regiments marched and tanks rolled through Red Square. Putin thanked those fighting in Ukraine and said the country is united.
We celebrate Victory Day in the context of the special military operation. All its participants, those who are on the front line, on the line of combat contact, are our heroes. All of Russia is with you.
Putin has used World War II to justify his invasion of Ukraine, claiming without evidence that the goal is to root out a neo-Nazi regime. Back in this country, 25 Republican attorneys general sued the Environmental Protection Agency over carbon emissions. They're challenging a rule that would cut those emissions from coal-fired power plants by 90% over 8 years. West Virginia's attorney general said the mandate is, quote, setting up the plants to fail and therefore shutter, altering the nation's already stretched grid. On Wall Street, stocks managed to gain some ground today. The Dow Jones Industrial Average was up 331 points to close at 39,387. The Nasdaq rose 43 points. The S&P 500 added 26. And the World Video Game Hall of Fame in Rochester, New York, has 5 new honorees. The class of 2024 includes Asteroids, which debuted in arcades in 1979, plus Ultima, Resident Evil, Myst, and SimCity. The Hall of Fame recognizes all types of electronic games, including arcade, console, computer, handheld, and mobile. Still to come on the NewsHour, the Biden administration proposes changes to the asylum system that would speed up deportations for certain migrants. A middle school's unique and successful approach to keeping students off their cell phones. And a new book takes a look at the women who shaped President Theodore Roosevelt.
This is the PBS NewsHour from WETA Studios in Washington.
Trump attorney, Alina Habba, joins me now. Alina, you've been there most of the time, right? In court?
Yes.
In this kangaroo court. No one knows what is happening inside.
Yeah.
Can you give us a little color about what it's really like?
So it is actually cold. I agree with the president on that. I didn't know how cold it would be. So, you walk in and it's really actually something surreal. You feel like you're in the Twilight Zone. Today, I walked in and the first person that caught my eye was everybody from Greg Kelly on the right to George Conway on the left, Kaylin Collins sitting there. And, I appreciate that they all want to act journalistic in those moments. I'm sitting there and I'm looking, but they're snarking and it's a very strange feeling.
So it's like a show trial for the media, right? Except there's no law that's been broken. They haven't even named the crime.
It's unbelievable. And when anything salacious happens, all you hear is the clicking of, the keyboards. But when actual law and facts are discussed, it's silent.
That I expect that. That sums it up perfectly. Everyone's looking at Donald Trump. Is he cursing? Is he sleeping? What else can you see when you're inside that room?
The ruin of our justice system, to be honest. You can see everything. I'm obviously sitting in the front row pew behind the team that's doing the case. And you can see everybody. There's a tech team. There's obviously all the people, the commentators that we see on TV sitting there all day watching. It's a very strange thing.
Does the judge seem like he's in control of the courtroom?
He is definitely commanding. You can tell that he is outspoken. You can tell that he has an opinion. In front of a jury, do I think it's appropriate? No. You have a jury. You have to be very careful of how much you interrupt, how much you condemn one side over the other. But I've seen this myself. They don't care. They care about swaying them, and that's one way to sway a jury. Just because you have a jury doesn't mean that the judge doesn't show control and push them towards the right direction.
And the jury's engaged. They're paying attention to the facts.
Sometimes I think with the last testimony, I saw some giggles, obviously, and I don't want to speak too much about a jury sitting on a trial, but, you know, maybe, I don't know. You know, it fades in back and forth, and it's very difficult to read a jury.
And you don't even know who's testifying tomorrow.
No.
How do you, as a defense attorney, prepare to cross-examine a witness when you don't know who the witness the next day is going to be?
Well, I think that's by design. And they're masking it with the unconstitutional gag order. They're saying that this is to protect witnesses, but they have no problem when their witnesses speak on TV or their witnesses, as you showed, post. That's not a problem. But it's a problem for President Trump's legal team to even know and prepare for the next witness the next day. Imagine, so you have to prepare for every witness that they give you, a long list at the beginning of the prosecution's table. They give you a long list, and you don't know who they're going to call, what they're going to ask about, and you have to be prepared every day for every single witness left on that list.
That's absolute insanity. Not even I could prepare that much. I'm very well prepared, as you are too. Alina, thank you so much.
This news is funded by viewers like you. Please support our work at democracynow.org/give. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Israel continues to seal off Gaza's Rafah border crossing as the UN warns it's, quote, choking off the entry of life-saving aid, unquote. The UN adds many of the 600,000 children taking shelter in Rafah are, quote, highly vulnerable and at the edge of survival, unquote. Save the Children also warns humanitarian operations will come to a complete halt unless Israel changes course in Rafah. The aid group says 3/4 of all child patients that have been treated in a so-called safe zone near Rafah have blast injuries. Tens of thousands of Palestinians are once again on the move, though many say their next destination is unknown with no safe place to shelter in Gaza. As Israel prepares for its full-scale ground invasion of Rafah, Palestinians continue to die under aerial attacks.
We were baking bread. We came to blood and mortars scattered. We're gathering them and body parts in pieces. The civil defense members came and gathered them in pieces. My friend died. They also picked him up in pieces. Everything is in pieces.
In an interview on CNN, President Biden said the U.S. will stop supplying certain weapons to Israel if its forces invade Rafah.
If they go into Rafah, I'm not supplying the weapons that have been used historically to deal with Rafah, to deal with the cities, to deal with that problem. We're going to continue to make sure Israel is secure in terms of Iron Dome and their ability to respond to attacks like came out of the Middle East recently. But it's just wrong. We're not going to supply the weapons and the artillery shells used that have been used.
Artillery shells as well.
Yeah, artillery shells.
Israel's extreme right national security minister Itamar Ben-Gvir posted on X this morning, Hamas hearts Biden. President Biden was in Chicago Wednesday for another campaign fundraiser where he was met with protesters who blocked downtown streets. Meanwhile, in Tel Aviv, protesting hostage families clashed with police. 2 arrests were made. The sister of a hostage was hospitalized. Her mother said in a social media video post, quote, "Bring back the hostages, stop the war with Hamas." Everywhere in Gaza, health workers uncovered another 49 bodies at the decimated Al-Shifa hospital Wednesday. Most of the bodies were decomposed. Some were found headless. 520 bodies have been uncovered across 3 Gaza Strip hospitals in recent weeks after attacks and sieges by the Israeli military. Attacking hospitals is a war crime. Israel on Wednesday bulldozed 47 homes of the Palestinian Bedouin community in the Negev desert, home to some 500 people. Israel's planning on building a highway on the site of the demolished homes, but the approval for the construction has yet to be granted. No alternative housing has been set up for the families who have now been rendered homeless. The Regional Council of Unrecognized Villages of Negev said the demolition was unprecedented in its, quote, scope of destruction and the hatred, unquote. Police have arrested scores more student protesters as part of a widening crackdown on encampments calling on schools to divest from Israel in the United States. At the University of Massachusetts Amherst, police raided a student encampment Tuesday night, arresting around 130. In Washington, D.C., police deployed tear gas as they broke up an encampment at George Washington University. 33 people were arrested. Police also broke up an encampment at the University of Houston. On Capitol Hill, Congressmember Rashida Tlaib held a press conference Wednesday where she praised student protesters.
These students are saying save lives no matter faith or ethnicity. That's right. This is something that I feel like is being completely ignored. Why are they out there? This is why we're proud. We're proud to use our position in office to bring these voices so you all don't forget why there are encampments and why there are movements in dissent around this country.
Students from George Washington University and other nearby schools joined Tlaib at the news conference.
Since day one, we have understood the monster before us. It is a collusion of academic institutions, administrations, police, Congress, and the state at large to protect the interests of the Israeli occupation of Palestinian land. They have affirmed a blatant mischaracterization of these encampments, naming them as anti-Semitic and dangerous in order to justify the carceral crackdown on student territory we've seen across the nation.
Here in New York City, faculty at the new school have launched the first pro-Palestine faculty encampment to protest the violent police crackdown on their students. The professors named the encampment after the Palestinian poet Rafat El-Hariri, who was killed in an Israeli airstrike in December.
Following police raids and violence, the new school faculty established the Rafat El-Hariri Faculty Solidarity Encampment. The call from students and Palestinians in Gaza is clear. We cannot give up. We must escalate and persevere to demand our universities divest, disclose, and boycott from the war profiteers and institutions justifying and aiding the genocide in Gaza.
Overseas, students at Trinity College in Dublin, Ireland, have ended their encampment after school officials agreed to divest from blacklisted Israeli companies that have ties to the occupied Palestinian territory. In Spain, the Senate of the University of Barcelona institutional and academic ties with Israel. Last month was the Earth's hottest April on record, making it the 11th consecutive month of breaking heat records. Extreme heat has plagued large swaths of Africa and Asia in particular, forcing school closures, destroying crops, and leading to hundreds of heat-related deaths. In Bangladesh, over 1 million Rohingya refugees living in camps in southeastern Cox's Bazar have been dealing with temperatures as high as 107 degrees Fahrenheit with few options for cooling down.
This heat is unbearable, especially in our tarp-made homes. During the daytime, it has been difficult to stay inside as the tarp soaks in the heat.
Meanwhile, the UN's International Organization for Migration is warning heavy rains and extreme flooding has created over 200,000 climate refugees over the past week across Burundi, Kenya, Rwanda, Somalia, Ethiopia, and Tanzania. Kenya's declared a national day of mourning Friday for the more than 200 people who've died in the country. Power Shift Africa said, quote, "The fossil fuel industry and the politicians that fail to stand up to it have blood on their hands," they said. In other climate news, back here in the United States, lawmakers in Vermont passed a first-of-its-kind bill this week that would make fossil fuel companies pay for destruction caused by climate change. Last summer, Vermont saw historic flooding, which submerged the capital, Montpelier. Damage from the July storm cost the Northeast close to $2.2 billion, according to a federal estimate. In Baltimore, Maryland, the body of the sixth and last missing construction worker killed in the March collapse of the Francis Scott Key Bridge has been recovered. 37-year-old Jose Manuel Lopez was originally from Guatemala. He had 2 young children. Last week, the body of 49-year-old Miguel Angel Luna Gonzalez was found. The FBI is reportedly looking into whether the massive Dali cargo ship violated a Civil War-era seaman's manslaughter statute when it struck the bridge, causing it to collapse. Here in New York, the family of Wynn Rosario, a 19-year-old from Queens who was killed by police, is demanding accountability for the teenager's death after the release last week of body cam video showing the fatal encounter inside his home. In late March, Wynn called 911 while experiencing a mental health crisis. The NYPD claimed Rosario came at them with a pair of scissors when they fatally shot him, but the video shows the teen was on the other side of the kitchen. The officers first repeatedly tased him, then opened fire despite desperate pleas from Rosario's mother, who attempted to shield her son as she urged the officers not to shoot him. The killing has set off protests and intense anger among the Bangladeshi community in Queens. Wynn Rosario's family, elected officials, and community leaders spoke at a news conference in front of New York City Hall yesterday to demand justice for Wynn. This is Wynn's brother, Ucho Rosario.
The people that's supposed to serve and protect us are the ones that's killing us. The police was so aggressive and reckless that they could have killed my mom and me too in our own house. Yeah. If anyone that wasn't a cop did what Alongi and Fresco did, they would have already been in jail. That's right. But yet they're still collecting their paycheck from the city like nothing happened.
Wynn's brother and parents also described the NYPD mistreating his family and making them feel like criminals right after the officers killed Wynn. The U.S. House of Representatives overwhelmingly shot down Congressmember Marjorie Taylor Greene's attempt to oust fellow Republican Mike Johnson as House Speaker. House Democrats blasted the ongoing GOP Speaker saga, with Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries declaring, quote, "Marjorie Taylor Greene and the extreme MAGA Republicans are chaos agents." Separately Wednesday, Speaker Johnson gathered with other Republican lawmakers in front of the Capitol to promote their so-called election integrity bill to stop residents who are not U.S. citizens from voting. Non-citizen voting is extremely rare. There's already a law prohibiting it. Speaker Johnson was joined by far-right figures, including Stephen Miller, and Republican lawmakers Chip Roy and Mike Lee, who participated in efforts to overturn the 2020 election results. And in campaign news, independent presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is facing questions about his health after the New York Times revealed he had a parasitic worm in his brain and was diagnosed with mercury poisoning over a decade ago. In a 2012 divorce deposition, Kennedy admitted he had cognitive problems, including short and long-term memory loss. He said abnormalities observed by doctors in the brain scan were believed to be due to, quote, "a worm that got into my brain and ate a portion of it, then died." Kennedy says he has fully recovered from both issues. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Mimi Goodman.
And I'm Nermeen Sheikh. Welcome to our listeners and viewers across the country and around the world.
Democracy.
In a new series.
That is really cool.
Incredible stories behind ordinary objects.
I have a really beautiful letter from Bob Hawke.
His records seem to go back to the 40s.
Tony Armstrong's Extraordinary Games starts Tuesday, May 21 on ABC TV and ABC iView.
Today, the jury in the Greg Lynn murder trial discharged just 24 hours after being impaneled. An Iranian man's fight to be released from immigration detention is dismissed by the High Court. A federal court justice to deliver his verdict on the costs Network 10 should receive after winning a defamation case against Bruce Lemon. And a great glut of grapes sees winemakers struggling to break even. Some even want the government to help them get out of the business. Good afternoon, welcome to ABC News. I'm Fauzia Ibrahim. The jury in the murder trial of Greg Lynn has been discharged less than 24 hours after being impaneled for what the judge has called technical reasons. Mr. Lynn is charged with the murders of 2 campers, Russell Hill and Carol Clay, in regional Victoria in March of 2020. Let's get more now from our reporter, Christian Silva, who is live for us in Melbourne. Christian, talk to us about what happened in court.
Good afternoon, Fazia. Well, yes, unfortunately this morning the jury had to be discharged just moments before the prosecution and defence were about to begin their opening arguments in this case. The jury panel of 14 had only been selected yesterday afternoon, so it is a pretty disappointing outcome. Justice Michael Croucher told the jury that what had happened was for technical reasons. He said he wouldn't be going into what those reasons were, but he did stress to the jury members that it wasn't anyone's fault. Outcomes like this are disappointing. However, having a jury being discharged pretty much before the trial has really got into the meaty parts is not the world's worst outcome. We've seen in other big cases where juries have been discharged midway through a case or sometimes all the way at the very end, and that is quite an unfortunate outcome. So we've avoided that, so that's something to be positive about. In terms of the background of this case, it all centres on a man called Greg Lynn, a former Jetstar pilot. He's accused of murdering two campers called Carol Clay and Russell Hill in Victoria's High Country in March of 2020. The jury panel yesterday was told that Mr. Lynn is alleged to have shot Carol Clay in the head and also murdered Mr. Hill, and we were going to get into the evidence today. So unfortunately that didn't happen, Fauzia.
And Christian, are there any indications as to when the new trial might be held?
It will be soon. We're absolutely going to have a new trial in this case. It's not a situation where, because the jury's discharged, these charges go away and the case doesn't happen. The trial will be held very soon in Victoria Supreme Court, and it's expected to run for 4 to 6 weeks. There could be about 100 witnesses called in the trial, so it's quite a significant trial, quite a use of the court's time. All sorts of witnesses are expected to be called to the stand, including fellow campers, scientific experts, family members of the alleged victims and of the accused man, Greg Lynn, and police as well. So we should be back in court in the near future to have another go at this trial. Fauzia?
Right. Christian Silver there reporting for us from Melbourne. Thank you. Moving on to other news now, and the High Court has dismissed a case brought by an Iranian man demanding to be released from immigration detention, finding that he does have the capacity to cooperate with authorities trying to deport him. Let's get more on this with our political reporter Matthew Doran, who's been covering the case for us. He joins us now from Parliament House. Take us through what the High Court found, Matthew.
Fazio, good afternoon. The High Court was making a decision on the case of a man known by the pseudonym of ASF-17. He's a 37-year-old bisexual Iranian man who arrived in Australia by boat more than a decade ago and has been subject to efforts to deport him since 2018. He has been refusing to cooperate with authorities trying to carry out that process, saying that if he is sent back to Iran, he will face persecution there on the grounds of his sexuality. And he's said that the Commonwealth has not made any efforts to try to find another country for him to go to, saying he doesn't want to necessarily stay in Australia. He'd be happy even being sent to war-ravaged Gaza, where he would feel more safe than Iran if indeed he was deported there. And what his lawyers were trying to do was effectively piggyback off of last year's High Court ruling that indefinite immigration detention for people with no reasonable prospect of deportation was unlawful. What the High Court has ruled today is that that is not the case in these set of circumstances. It has said that the man in question, ASF-17, does have the key to his own release here. He can choose to cooperate with authorities and get out of immigration detention, and through that process, of course, he would be deported back to Iran. There has been a bit of debate throughout the course of this argument, the course of this legal case, as to whether or not the individual in question's sexuality has been a recent development, or whether or not he has ever raised it in the past when he was trying to get a protection visa to stay in Australia. He says that the Commonwealth never took it into account. The Commonwealth says ASF-17 never raised it when he was looking for a visa, and that this process, this frustration of the deportation process, is of his own making. They've distinguished it from another case which is has been decided upon by the federal court. That is the case of another Iranian man known by the pseudonym of AZC-20. He actually had joined this case because it could have implications for his own set of circumstances, but that man has been released into the community because there are concerns around his mental capacity to actually cooperate with authorities. The High Court, in a unanimous judgment today, saying that they are very different circumstances and that this man, ASF-17, does have the capacity to cooperate if indeed he chooses to do so.
All right, that's the High Court finding. Has there been much reaction to that so far?
Well, we've heard from the Immigration Minister, Andrew Giles. He has welcomed that finding and said that the Commonwealth fought this case strongly, and we are expecting to hear from him in a press conference within the next hour or so from Melbourne. We have also heard from the federal opposition, the coalition, the Shadow Attorney General Michaelia Cash and the Shadow Home Affairs Minister James Patterson, welcoming this decision and saying it's a pretty uncontroversial position for the High Court to take. It is a common sense decision that non-cooperation should not then be a grounds for someone to be released into the community. We do know that there were significant concerns around this case if indeed the High Court had found in favour of ASF-17. Between 150 and 200 people are currently in immigration detention, refusing to cooperate with authorities trying to deport them. So if any ruling had been made in favour of ASF-17 or any rewriting of the legal precedent here, that could well have affected some members of that cohort. And we also know that the federal government had rushed legislation into Parliament before Easter trying to make non-cooperation in deportation a criminal offence, something they said was in part driven by the ASF-17 case, which was before the court, but not the only factor there. However, the government has never actually been able to explain what some of those other factors are. So it seems like this does have wide political support, this decision of the High Court, not that that is any bearing on the High Court's deliberations here, but it doesn't take the heat out of the broader political disputes happening in the immigration space at the moment, and the ongoing criticism of the Albanese government's handling of the fallout from last year's High Court case, the NZYQ decision, where more than 153 people, in fact, have been released, some of them subject to ankle bracelets and curfews as a condition of their visa, whether or not the government has acted appropriately there to protect the community.
Matt Doran in Canberra, thank you. The Department of Foreign Affairs is assisting a South Australian man facing drug offences in Bali. The man could face up to 12 years in jail if convicted. Our reporter Bethany Alderson has the details.
Troy Smith has now spent more than a week in custody in Bali and is facing the prospect of a lengthy prison sentence for alleged drug offences. It's understood the Port Lincoln man was holidaying in Bali with his wife when he was arrested at a luxury hotel in Kuta last Tuesday. Balinese authorities allege he was found with just over 3 grams of methamphetamine and say he's now being held in Bali's police detention centre in the capital Denpasar for questioning. Bali's police director of narcotics has told the ABC that it's been alleged that the drugs were sent from Australia at Mr Smith's request. The director said the amount Mr Smith allegedly had on him is regarded as personal use, not trafficking, and would therefore carry a potential sentence of up to 12 years in jail if convicted. Mr Smith's lawyer also spoke to the ABC saying local customs officers became suspicious after coming across a package addressed to Mr. Smith. He says Mr. Smith has been stressed following his arrest and has been sitting through police interrogation for up to 6 hours at a time. We're yet to hear from any of Mr. Smith's family, but his lawyer did say that his wife is still in Bali and providing him with support. The Department for Foreign Affairs and Trade has also confirmed that it's providing consular assistance to an Australian man detained in Bali, but was unable to provide any further details. It's expected that Bali police will provide an update on the matter early next week.
Well, Bruce Lerman is likely to be handed the bill today for his failed defamation action against Network 10 and journalist Lisa Wilkinson. The federal court will hand down its decision just after 2 p.m. Sydney time. Our reporter Melissa McKay joins us now to talk through the case. So, Melissa, what are we expected to learn today?
Yeah, so Fauci, this is the costs decision. Essentially, the judge will decide who has to pay what, and it's likely that these bills will run into the millions of dollars. We had a cost hearing at the beginning of the month, and Network 10's lawyers argued then that Bruce Lerman should pay indemnity costs, which goes beyond the sort of standard costs order. They argued that that was in part due to the nature of the proceedings, that they argued that Mr. Lerman must have known that this defamation case was, as they said, doomed to fail. Part of their argument was also that Mr. Lerman, they said, had walked away from an offer to settle. But Mr. Lerman's lawyers argued that this case doesn't quite reach the threshold for that indemnity cost. So we'll find that out as well. Mr. Lerman has, of course, denied this alleged rape happened. His criminal case was stopped in the ACT due to juror misconduct. There are no findings in the criminal case against him. This defamation case, though, did fail when 10's truth defence, essentially, was found on the balance of probabilities to be true by the federal court.
All right, so we know that Bruce Lerman lost that defamation case. Any indication as to whether he will appeal that outcome?
Well, he's got until the end of this month to decide, essentially. We heard from his lawyers a little bit earlier this week that they are seeking or have sought sort of an extended period of time to be able to file that appeal if they choose to do so. We know that new lawyers have been briefed on that appeal, and that essentially there was so much content to go through that they have sought that sort of extended period of time. So that runs out at the end of this month, and we'll find out more about that appeal if it's launched a little bit later on.
We're expected to hear from the court after 2 p.m. today, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Melissa McKay, thank you. A 45-year-old man has appeared in a Sydney court charged over the stabbing of his former girlfriend in the car park of the Sydney gym. Reporter Leah Harris has the details.
Anthony Monteleone has appeared in court this morning charged over the stabbing of his former girlfriend on Thursday outside a gym in South Sydney. He appeared to be wearing a hospital gown as he appeared via video link from Surrey Hills holding cells, and he did not apply for bail, so he will remain in custody for now. The 45-year-old has been charged over the alleged stabbing of his former girlfriend in a car park in Alexandria around 12:30 on Thursday. A man allegedly approached her, stabbed her in the upper body before fleeing in a car. She then ran for help inside the gym. She was taken by ambulance to hospital, where she remains in a stable condition. Police spent many hours looking for Mr. Monteleone after the alleged crime before he handed himself in yesterday to DY Police Station on Sydney's northern beaches. He was then transferred to Manly Police Station and questioned for several hours before being charged over the stabbing last night. He's also been charged with breaching an apprehended domestic violence order that was in place to protect the 39-year-old victim. Police say the pair had dated only very briefly, and the court today heard he may also have been in breach of an intensive corrections order that was put in place last month after he was convicted of breaching the ADVO 2 times before last month. Now, he will remain in custody for now until his next court appearance in July, while his alleged victim remains in hospital recovering from her injuries.
Adult film star Stormy Daniels has given her final testimony in Donald Trump's hush money trial. Earlier this week, Ms. Daniels detailed her alleged sexual encounter with the former US president in 2006. Today, Mr. Trump's lawyers attempted to discredit her claims, accusing Ms. Daniels of trying to profit off her story and making up parts of it. In a tense back-and-forth exchange, the New York court saw tweets from Ms. Daniels where she said, "I'll dance down the street when he is selected to go to jail." It's alleged that Ms. Daniels received almost $200,000 for her silence during the 2016 presidential election. Mr. Trump is charged with falsifying business records to conceal the payment.
I want to thank my lawyers. They've done a very good job, but I'd rather thank them after it's over as opposed to now, because we don't want them to get carried away. There's no case. Should have never been brought out.
Donald Trump has always denied a sexual encounter with Ms. Daniels and pleaded not guilty to 34 counts of falsifying business records. Overseas now, and Israel is pressing ahead with its military operations on the ground in Gaza. This is despite the U.S. suspending a delivery of munitions. Our Global Affairs editor John Lyons joins me now in the studio. Now, the U.S. has made it very clear that they will not be supporting this Rafah incursion. Where are we at the moment with Israel's movement?
Well, Fauci, Israel is in effect now attacking Rafah. They're not doing it by the hundreds of ground troops that people thought they might do it by. They're doing it by special operations groups. They've got the tanks in there on the south, up against the border, the Rafah crossing into Egypt. They're bombing from the air. It appears they're shelling also from the sea. So Rafah is under attack, although they haven't done the big ground incursion, which the optics of which the United States would have found uncomfortable. But despite President Biden saying that he really didn't want it, and he used the phrase civilians have been killed in Gaza as a consequence of the bombs that America's been providing, and that the Israelis, they go after population centres, was his expression yesterday on CNN. So he was definitely saying to them, don't attack Rafah. They are attacking Rafah, but they're doing it in a bit-by-bit way. It's not as obvious as it would have been if it was a full ground invasion.
The US has stopped its shipment of bombs to Israel just ahead of this attack, of course. Benjamin Netanyahu has come out to say that Israel will do it on its own, or will stand on its own in this incursion. Is the rest of his cabinet as confident as him?
Well, there's a lot of hostility towards the Americans over this, and that's what he's replying to. For example, Ben Gvir, the Minister for National Security, has tweeted, Hamas loves Biden, and Ehud Olmert, the former, and that's led to Yair Lapid, who's an opposition figure, a prominent one in Israel, saying that if Netanyahu does not sack or fire Ben Gvir today, then he, Netanyahu, is endangering every soldier in the IDF and every citizen in the state of Israel. And the former Prime Minister Ehud Olmert says this is a major turning point now for Israel. The breakdown of relations between the President of the US and Benjamin Netanyahu is a major turning point. And Mr. Olmert says the most dangerous country in the world for Israel at the moment is the government of Israel. So there's now a crisis in Israel. I've lived there for 6 years, and one thing I learned living there is that more than anything, Israelis value their relationship with the United States because the US is its biggest supporter, it's the funder, it underwrites the army and the military. And now for the President of the United States to be saying, enough is enough, you've gone too far, you've killed too many civilians. As he said, they've been indiscriminately bombing Gaza. They've been trying for months and months to get the Israelis to become more targeted, and yet tens of thousands of women and children have been killed.
Does Israel have the capacity to have the Rafah incursion as well as continue with its war in Gaza?
Well, the Rafah, they've simply planted tanks along Rafah, and it's limited incursion, and they've got a lot of soldiers through other parts of the Gaza Strip. So, yes, they have the capacity, but if the Americans decided to cut off bombs permanently, as Ronald Reagan threatened in 1982, when the Israelis were bombing Beirut, and President Reagan's view at that time was they were indiscriminately killing and bombing civilian targets in Beirut, then he rang Prime Minister Menachem Begin, and said, stop, or else we will stop giving you weapons and bombs. And within hours, Israel stopped bombing Beirut. President Biden hasn't been that strong. He's saying we're pausing one shipment. The really weird thing here is that he's been saying for months they're indiscriminately bombing and too many civilians are killed, and yet they've kept supplying bombs the whole way through. It's now a political problem for him in the United States. He now risks losing a state like Michigan because of the anger of the Arab American community, who are saying quite openly that the United States is complicit in genocide against the Palestinian people. And they're saying they won't turn out to vote in November. And a state like Michigan, the Arab American vote is larger than the margin by which the Democrats hold the state. So for the first time in history, an American president is in danger of losing office for being seen as too pro-Israel, because the strong Jewish votes in America tend to be in safer states, Florida, California, New York, whereas the Arab American vote tends to be in some swing states, 4 or 5 of them. And so that alters the whole of the political dynamic in America, and that's, I think, why President Biden is now saying 7 months in, enough.
The repercussions are wide, aren't they? But just going back to Rafah, what are you hearing from your contacts on the ground, in preparation for this incursion?
Well, from people inside there, the fear, it's miserable. Famine has now started, full-blown famine in the north, which they think is moving to the south. But there's a woman in Rafah sent out this note to a contact of mine. I'll just read it quickly. And she said overnight, she could hear the bombing. This is a woman who's living, a Palestinian woman in Rafah. I think the end is approaching quickly. The situation is taking a dangerous turn with the bombing and the advance of the vehicles in Rafah. Heavy indiscriminate bombing everywhere, continuous shooting from aircraft. We only say, O Lord, be with us, not against us. Bombing and bombing buildings and launching shells from the sea while we're in the middle, not knowing where to go. Even the house is not safe, nor is the street safe. Where do I go, she said. That's from a woman overnight in Rafah to a friend of hers in Jerusalem. So the fear there is extraordinary. And after 7 months of war, the trauma of everybody. 26 hospitals closed. There's no medical treatment much to speak of. The water system's not working. Children are now bearing children. UNICEF says there's 19,000 or 20,000 orphans now, at least, in Gaza. Now, when their siblings die, the parents aren't there to bury them. So some of the brothers and sisters are having to bury their younger brothers and sisters. And there's children wandering around hospitals, according to doctors. Like if a 2-year-old's parents have been killed, they don't know what to do. And the children, medical staff say their children are wandering around the hospital without, like a stray animal. And they're lucky if a nurse or a doctor happens to say, look, I'll look after you, because they don't know their names. And parents are putting bracelets on their children's wrists and ankles in case the child is killed and blown up. At least they can identify the body part. So it's got that horrible.
All right. John Lyons, our Global Affairs Editor, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're now going to take you live to Melbourne, where the Immigration Minister, Andrew Giles, is speaking about today's High Court decision.
She's here to deal and assist with any matters that go to operational issues. Now, today, the High Court has handed down a unanimous decision in which all members of the court have decided that a non-citizen who has no right to stay in this country and who is not cooperating with their removal can remain in immigration detention until such time as we remove them. The government welcomes this decision of the court because we've always held this view. And I want to make this very clear. If you have no right to stay in Australia, if you have committed a crime in Australia and you are not owed protection by Australia, we have the right to remove you from this country. But we will continue to work to make our migration system better, stronger, and also fairer. Next week, Peter Dutton will have a choice to make. He'll be able to support a bill that strengthens our ability to remove people from Australia who have no right to remain here, that gives us the tools to both strengthen our borders and our refugee protection framework. So far, though, Mr Dutton has shown that he is only interested in playing politics with this issue. He offers no alternatives and no solutions. Time and time again, he simply says no. He has nothing positive to offer this country in this area of policy or anywhere else. He has no solutions, only problems, mostly of his making.
If we have to stand alone, we will stand alone in response to the US halting some arms supplies to Israel. Prime Minister Netanyahu says that won't stop his country's offensive in Gaza.
Stormy Daniels gave her testimony for Donald Trump's hush money trial, a moment of high tension and explicit allegations about the former president. Taylor Swift fever struck Paris. Pop superstar started the European leg of her world tour, with fans treated to the first ever performance of songs from her latest album. Hello and welcome to France 24, I'm Clarisse Fortuny. Israeli Prime Minister said his country can stand alone, but he hopes US and Israel can overcome their differences. Benjamin Netanyahu was speaking after Washington's threat to withhold its weapons. The US State Department later hit back, warning the planned offensive in Rafah was a mistake that would hurt Israel in the long run. Laurent Berstecher has the story.
Refusing to bow down to U.S. pressure, Benjamin Netanyahu said Israel was ready to press on with a large-scale offensive on Rafah, even without the support of its closest ally.
We are determined and we are united to defeat our enemies and those who seek out our souls. If we have to stand alone, we will stand alone. I've said it before, if we have to, we'll fight tooth and nail.
Israel's military spokesman later backed up Netanyahu's warning and said the IDF had everything it needed to attack Rafah. The declarations came as a slap in the face to Washington, which sees a large-scale offensive on the southern Gazan city as crossing a red line. Joe Biden said Thursday he was ready to pause more weapons and military aid shipments if Israel went ahead with the operation. The U.S. fears the offensive could lead to mass civilian casualties and warned it would further damage Israel's international standing, jeopardize ceasefire negotiations, and hand a strategic victory to Hamas.
We actually think that a Rafah operation would weaken Israel's position both in these talks and writ large. We have presented a full range of other policy choices that they can make that we think would achieve the goal of dismantling Hamas and choking off the Hamas battalions that remain in Rafah without further endangering civilians there.
The White House said talks to secure a 6-week ceasefire were still ongoing, but the U.S. and Palestinian delegations both left Cairo on Thursday, with Hamas saying the ball was now in Israel's camp.
And meanwhile, elsewhere, thousands of pro-Palestinian demonstrators took to the streets of Malmö on Thursday to protest against Israel's participation in the Eurovision Song Contest. It came as the Swedish city hosted the pop song competition's second semi-final, in which Israel's entrant Eden Golan qualified for Saturday's grand final. She managed to answer to the press about her presence in the competition.
Have you ever felt that by being here, you bring risk and danger for other participants and public?
You don't have to answer that question if you don't want to. If you want to answer, please.
I think we're all here for one reason and one reason only, and the EBU is taking all safety precautions to make this a safe and united place for everyone. And so I think it's safe for everyone, and we wouldn't be here for any other reason.
Good.
And in other news, Stormy Daniels went to court to give evidence in Donald Trump's hush money trial. The former adult actress spent hours recounting in sometimes graphic detail her sexual encounter with the former president. She was paid to keep quiet about it during the 2016 presidential election, and that payment was hidden as a legitimate business expense. Now, Trump faces multiple felony counts of false accounting and fraud. Jessica Le Mazurier was in court in New York.
Former adult film star Stormy Daniels has now finished her second day of testimony in Trump's hush money trial here in New York. Hers was without a doubt the most dramatic testimony so far. She's a key witness in the trial, which revolves around a $130,000 hush money payment made to her before the 2016 election. Now, Daniels described her alleged sexual encounter with Trump at a golf tournament in 2006 in excruciating detail in the courtroom. She included details of how Trump greeted her in satin pajamas, and she said the sex was quick, and he called her honey bunch. The testimony from Daniels appeared to be rather embarrassing for Donald Trump. Now, Trump denies ever having had sex with Daniels, and over about 4 hours of cross-examination on Tuesday and Thursday, the defense lawyer tried to point out inconsistencies in her story. The main argument from Trump's lawyer, or the argument that Trump's lawyer appeared to be trying to make, was that Stormy Daniels had lied about her alleged affair with Trump and was just trying to make money off the story. The defense tried to paint her as a nasty lady by showing a response that Stormy Daniels had given to a threatening tweet in which she called the person dumb and then said that she would dance on the streets if Trump were jailed. Well, the defense lawyer asked her, well, you can be nasty, right? And to that, she replied, yes. Trump didn't even deign to look at her when she left the courtroom on Thursday. Trump pleaded not guilty to these 34 counts of falsifying business records to conceal a hush money payment to Stormy Daniels. Prosecutors argue that this amounts to election fraud.
Now to Chad, where provisional results have been released for this week's presidential election. They give Mahamat Idris Deby Itno the winner. The Electoral Commission said Deby won 61.03% of votes, beating his Prime Minister, Sakseh Masra. The results are due to be confirmed by the Constitutional Council, but Mahamat Idris Deby already welcomed the outcome.
Following this sweeping victory, I'm now the elected president of all Chadians. Not only the president of those who voted for me, but also the president of those who made other choices.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky fired his bodyguard chief after 2 of its officers were detained this week over an alleged assassination plot. This after Ukraine's SBU security service said a Russian plot to assassinate Zelensky and other senior officials was foiled. 2 colonels from the bodyguard department were detained on suspicion of passing secret information to Russia's rival FSB security service. And meanwhile, President Vladimir Putin celebrated the defeat of Nazi Germany in World War II. He hailed his forces fighting in Ukraine, blasting the West for fueling conflicts around the world. Putin led the festivities across Russia that recall the nation's wartime sacrifice. Even though few veterans are still alive, the victory remains a key element of national identity. Argentina's biggest trade union staged a mass general strike on Thursday, leading to the cancellations of hundreds of flights and halting public transport. They were protesting against Javier Milei's austerity measures, which critics say have massively affected the poor. Laurent Berstecher has more.
Eerily empty streets, deserted train stations, and shuttered storefronts. Buenos Aires was brought to a standstill on Thursday as labor unions called for a 24-hour strike to protest against austerity measures. Some 400 flights were cancelled, while schools, banks, and service stations remained closed, and the capital's public transportation was reduced to a trickle for some 3 million commuters. Residents there were left divided by the strike.
People have a right to complain, but they're also hurting everyone else. Many people want to go to work, and obviously they can't get there, so they get a day's pay deducted. I think the strike is excessive.
The current situation of workers in Argentina in transportation and many other sectors is not ideal. So I believe that a strong action was necessary.
It was the second strike in 5 months to protest against Javier Milei's austerity program. The Argentinian president campaigned on the pledge to reduce the country's deficit to zero, and since his election in November, he's overseen drastic cuts to public spending, including by slashing crucial subsidies, firing thousands of public servants, and devaluating the peso by 50%. Milei insists his plan is working and has in recent months claimed some victories, including Argentina's first budget surplus in 16 years. But critics say these have come at the cost of the working and middle class, with inflation nearing 300% and more than half of the country's population now living in poverty.
There's increasingly safety concerns for Boeing after 2 jets were involved in accidents. In Senegal, a Boeing 737 plane carrying 85 people caught fire and skidded off a runway at the main airport. More than 10 people were injured, including the pilot. And in Turkey, a plane's tire burst on landing, causing an evacuation emergency. Tom Kennedy tells the story.
Several more incidents on Boeing aircrafts in only a few days. This one in Senegal, where 11 passengers were injured after a plane came off the runway during takeoff. Here in Turkey on Wednesday, a FedEx Airlines Boeing 677 cargo plane was doused in foam after it landed on its nose at Istanbul Airport, forcing its pilots to climb out of the cockpit window. Flying from Paris-Charles de Gaulle Airport, the aircraft informed the control tower that its landing gear had failed to open and hit the tarmac with guidance from the tower, avoiding casualties. And on Thursday, also in Turkey, a Boeing 737's front tire burst upon landing. Another problem with the plane's landing gear, according to Turkey's Transport Ministry. And earlier on Tuesday, a Boeing 787-900 flying to Seattle from Paris was diverted to Canada after a burning smell was detected in the cabin. 4 incidents come at a time when Boeing is facing immense scrutiny, after investigations into its assembling process found several non-compliances, leading to ongoing investigations by the Federal Aviation Administration.
Paris is gearing up for the 2024 Summer Games, but had already a massive event to contend with that drew huge numbers of visitors to the French capital. Taylor Swift kicked off her European tour in Paris on Thursday night with a fifth of the crowd coming from the United States. Monty Francis has a story.
It is already the highest-grossing concert tour of all time.
Welcome to the Eras Tour.
Taylor Swift's Eras Tour is the first to sell more than $1 billion in tickets and is on track to double that number by the end of its run this December. The European leg kicks off in Paris for 4 nights at the La Défense Arena, where thousands of devoted fans have traveled overseas to see their favorite pop star.
And we've been having fun listening to music and making bracelets. We've made some new friends because, everyone here is here for the same thing, the same person, so it's been super fun. Yeah.
The La Défense Arena has a capacity of just 40,000, but according to a New York travel agency, the Eras Tour is drawing 5 times as many Americans to the French capital as the Paris 2024 Olympics. This is not the first time Swift and her fandom have overshadowed a big event. Her attendance at the Super Bowl to support her boyfriend, a tight end for the Kansas City Chiefs, helped make the championship game one of the most watched broadcasts in U.S. history. Stockholm is the only Scandinavian city on Swift's tour, and the city is expecting a huge economic boom as Swifties swarm Sweden's capital.
The total costs in Stockholm are skyrocketing this weekend in May, and the reason is quite simple. In the Stockholm region, we have approximately 40,000 hotel rooms, approximately 80,000 beds, approximately 120,000 people will be traveling to Stockholm for the weekend, so we're out of room.
After performing sold-out concerts in Paris, Swift will continue the European leg of her Eras Tour with dates in Sweden, Portugal, Spain, Britain, Ireland, the Netherlands, Switzerland, Italy, Germany, Poland, and Austria.
Taylor Swift ending this edition. Thank you for watching. More news coming up.
This is Asia Now.
Good morning. It's 11 a.m. in Singapore and Hong Kong, 8:30 in New Delhi, and 10 o'clock in Jakarta. I'm Teresa Tang. At this hour, the U.S. and Israel dialing down the rhetoric. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and the White House say they hope to overcome their disagreements on Rafah after President Joe Biden withholds some weapons from Israel. Biden dealing with criticism from Republicans as some plan impeachment articles against the president over stopping the shipment of arms to Israel. And China and Hungary hail their so-called all-weather partnership. Chinese President Xi Jinping says he is counting on Hungary to become an ever-stronger member of the EU as Beijing seeks closer ties in the region. The U.S. and Israel trying to find accord over the issue of an operation into Rafah today. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says he hopes to overcome disagreements with the U.S. The White House said it is offering alternatives to an attack on Rafah.
We're going to keep working with them on our part to develop alternative approaches that we think will have a better chance of strategic success, a better chance at eliminating the threat that the Israeli people still face from Hamas.
This comes after President Joe Biden threatened to withhold weapons from Israel if it assaults Rafah. The shipment includes heavy bombs that can inflict damage over a very wide area. Israel, though, has been defiant to Mr. Biden's threat and has continued striking Rafah from the air. Another point of contention between the U.S. and Israel is the relocation of civilians in Rafah. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has said his government opposes forced relocation of Palestinians from Gaza. Mr. Blinken also called for the reopening of Rafah crossing and to allow the flow of urgently needed humanitarian aid. Israel had seized the border crossing at Rafah, which has hampered aid deliveries. Around 100,000 people have reportedly fled Rafah after Israeli strikes on the southern city intensified. The United Nations says many Palestinians are now heading towards central Gaza via cars and carriages, hoping to find safety.
As Israeli forces mass on the outskirts of Rafah, fleeing Palestinians say they're already struggling to find a place to stay. Deir al-Balah in central Gaza is crammed with people who fled in recent days. Amani al-Fayoumi is among those who can't find anywhere to set up camp. Sumaya Sha'ban and her children have been sat by the road for 3 days. What little aid there is doesn't reach them.
A passenger jet catches fire after skidding off the runway in Senegal's capital as plane maker Boeing's reputation takes another hit.
Benin has prevented Niger from using its port to export its first crude oil, urging Nigerian military authorities to normalize trade relations.
Phone footage showed terrified passengers slide down the emergency exits after the plane skidded off the runway at Dakar's Blaise Diagne Airport. The plane, a Boeing 737-300 operated by Transair, was headed to Bamako in neighboring Mali late Wednesday with 79 passengers, 2 pilots and 4 cabin crew on board. It caught fire after the incident, which was put out by emergency crews. The accident is the latest in a series of bad news for American plane maker Boeing. On Wednesday, a cargo plane was forced to land in Istanbul without its front gear.
First drops of Nigerian oil gushed out at Semekrake in Benin 2 weeks ago. Beninese President Patrice Talon now says Niger will not use its port to export the oil. In a statement Wednesday, Talon said that Niger's logic was to blame. Benin is a member of ECOWAS. The West African bloc threatened the Nigerian junta with a military operation following a coup last July. Hit by ECOWAS sanctions, Niger closed its border with Benin. Porto Novo progressively took a softer stance on its neighbor and opened its border. Talon says his country exports large quantities of staples to Niger, but because of the closed border on the Nigerian side, informal vendors allegedly profit when Beninese suffer price increases. Talon accuses Nigerian authorities of rejecting formal cooperation. He has tied the opening of the semi-port to the normalization of trade relations. About 90,000 barrels per day was said to pass through the Chinese-built Niger-Benin pipeline.
The Kenyan government and the doctors' union on Wednesday reached a deal to end a 56-day strike by medical workers. The agreement followed an ultimatum by the Labour Court urging the two parties to agree a return-to-work formula. The head of the union, which also includes pharmacists and dentists, signed the agreement on behalf of the medical workers, while the health minister represented the Kenyan government. But the union has not said when the doctors will report back to work. In mid-March, medical workers resorted to industrial action to demand comprehensive medical cover and the payment of salary arrears. They also demanded the immediate placement of more than 1,000 medical interns. The doctors were joined in the strike by clinical officers. They accused the authorities of reneging on a deal reached on the back of another strike in 2017. The agreement to return to work is a big relief to overstretched government hospitals, which are now dealing with a cholera outbreak.
The Supreme Court of Ghana has commenced deliberations on the challenge to the anti-LGBTQ+ legislation passed by the parliament earlier this year. A permission was granted by the court to contest the contentious bill, which imposes strict penalties, including imprisonment to individuals identifying as LGBTQ+ or advocating for the LGBTQ+ rights. In March, a lawsuit was filed seeking to halt the bill's progress, urging the court to prevent parliamentary officials from forwarding the bill to the president for approval and to block President Nana Akufo-Addo from igniting it into law. The initial day of proceedings was marked by tension, characterized by impassioned arguments between legal representatives and the Chief Justice. President Akufo-Addo has indicated his intent to await the Supreme Court's ruling before deciding on the bill's fate. The case has been adjourned until May 17th. Copernicus, the EU's climate change agency, released data indicating that April 2024 was the hottest on record globally, at 1.49 Celsius, above the average between 1991 and 2020. While EU experienced its second warmest April, all the regions saw greater temperature increases, and most of Africa were particularly affected.
When we look at temperature, is yet another record-breaking month, and this means that the sequence, the streak of months, of record-breaking months that started last year in June, is continuing, and now we are at 11 months. So that's one thing, and that's true for the global mean average, but it's also true for seawater temperature.
In Morocco, the effect of rising temperatures are imminent as the country prepares for a heat wave forecasted to hit several provinces from Tuesday to Friday. The General Directorate of Meteorology issued an orange alert, warning of temperatures soaring between 40 and 44 degrees Celsius during this period. It's the 11th month that temperatures have broken previous records, according to the EU's climate change agency.
We will see again and again El Nino and La Nina alternating with one another. We'll see cooler and wetter and drier years, but the tendency is what matters, and the tendency is towards a warmer climate.
This news comes as Morocco's ongoing struggle with drought now enters its 6th consecutive year.
Tonight, contentious cross-examination of Stormy Daniels.
Here we sit after 2.5 weeks, and I think you'll see some very revealing things today.
Donald Trump's lawyers grill the adult film star to call her credibility into question. The CBS Evening News starts now. Good evening, I'm Nora O'Donnell, and thank you for being with us. Tonight, jurors in the so-called hush money case against Donald Trump are weighing a dizzying day and a half of testimony from adult film star Stormy Daniels. She was called back to the witness stand today with the former president sitting just feet away from Daniels as his attorneys prodded her about sex, the porn industry, and more. They aimed to paint her as a money-hungry liar as they questioned her about the alleged 2006 tryst that resulted in the now infamous hush money payment. And Daniels forcefully pushed back, saying, quote, "If that story was untrue, I would have written it to be a lot better." Trump faces 34 felony counts of falsifying business records to cover up that payment. CBS's Robert Costa starts us off tonight with the salacious details from court.
Former President Donald Trump has always advised his lawyers to be aggressive. Today, his defense team targeted Stormy Daniels' credibility.
Robert, thank you. Now to some breaking news. A Florida Sheriff's Office released body camera video this afternoon showing the fatal shooting of a U.S. Air Force airman last week inside his own apartment. CBS's Mark Strassman reports the family of the decorated service member is seeking answers and a warning. Some of these images you will see are disturbing.
Tonight, newly released body cam video shows an...
Thank you for watching and privilege of your time. This is Amir Shakil 5858. I am Amir Woodman. Have a good life.